If you've read all of Mark Manson's books, watched all of his videos, gone through his articles, tried to apply his philosophy and nothing worked, it's not you. Not because you did it wrong, it's just the system is designed to make you fail. Let's take a look at the actual mechanics of his approach and see why it doesn't work. Mark Manson built his brand on rejecting positive thinking bullshit. Life is suffering, just choose what to suffer for. Sounds like brutal honesty after decades of toxic positivity. I love profanity, but let's strip it away for a second along with contrarian aesthetics, and we'll find the exact same neoliberal ideology. Your problems are your fault, your solutions are your responsibility, the system is never the issue. The difference is packaging. Instead of think positive, it's think realistic. Same core program, different interface. Mark Manson is clever enough to admit that most self-help doesn't work. He'll tell you that the industry is full of fluff, cheap tricks, and empty promises. And that sounds refreshing. Finally, someone honest, right? But here's the catch. By pointing out the failure of others, he positions himself as the exception. His whole brand is built on, I'm not like those fake gurus, I tell it like it is. That's the sales pitch. The moment you buy into that frame, you're already sold. Not on freedom, but on his particular flavor of the same system. Manson didn't invent his philosophy. He openly admits it's borrowed, recycled from old schools of thought. What he's really channeling is a specific ideological framework that gained traction in 1980s. The belief that everything that happens to you is the direct result of your individual choices. This sounds more like political ideology. When you can't afford healthcare, it's because you chose the wrong career. When you're depressed, it's because you chose the wrong values. When the system fucks you over, it's because you chose to be fuckable. Notice what disappears in this framework. Economic structures, power dynamics, historical context, material conditions, all that matters is your individual mindset and your individual choices. The system is invisible, which means it's also unquestionable. Manson has perfected his ideology for the self-help market. He packages individual responsibility as wisdom, systemic acceptance as maturity, and analytical passivity as philosophical depth. Here's where Manson's system gets really interesting. He tells you to just choose your values and just choose what to care about, but he never explains how choice actually works in a human brain. You can't just decide to stop being anxious. You can't just choose to value different things. Your nervous system, your conditioning, your programmed responses, these operate below the level of conscious choice. But Manson's philosophy requires you to have control you don't actually have. So when his methods fail, which they will because they're based on a false premise, the failure gets reframed as your failure. You didn't choose hard enough. You didn't embrace suffering correctly. You're not applying the philosophy properly. This creates an impossibility engine, a system that demands you do something impossible, then blames you can't do it. The failure is built into the design. Let's examine Manson's central obsession, suffering. Life is suffering, so choose what you suffer for. This sounds profound until you analyze what it actually does. Instead of asking, why are you suffering? Or what's causing this suffering? Or is this suffering necessary? He redirects you to how can you suffer better? This is a massive analytical shutdown. It takes legitimate pain that might have specific, addressable causes, and abstracts it into a philosophical category. Your depression isn't a response to alienating work conditions, it's just suffering that you need to choose differently. Your anxiety isn't a rational response to economic precarity, it's just more suffering to be embraced. The redirect serves power. If you're suffering because someone is exploiting you, the solution isn't to change your relationship to suffering, it's to stop the exploitation. But that would require looking at systems, structures, and power dynamics. Manson's philosophy prevents that analysis from ever happening. One of Manson's favorite moves is telling people they're not special because everyone has problems. This sounds like ego deflation, but it's actually analytical destruction. If you're depressed because you're trapped in an abusive job and someone else is depressed because of a breakup, Manson treats these as equivalent problems. Both people just need to choose better values and stop thinking they're special. But these situations are completely different. One requires economic analysis and potentially collective action. The other requires emotional processing and relationship skills. By collapsing all suffering into the same category, Manson makes targeted solutions impossible. This false equivalence prevents you from understanding your specific circumstances. Instead of analyzing what's actually wrong in your particular situation, you're supposed to accept that everyone struggles and move on. No analysis, no solutions, just acceptance. Manson's concept of responsibility is where the manipulation gets most obvious. He says you're responsible for everything that happens to you, not just your reactions, but the situations themselves. This isn't empowerment, it's a logical error. Real responsibility requires distinguishing between what you can and can't control. You can influence some of your choices and responses, but you can't control economic systems, other people's behavior, historical circumstances, or biological realities. But admitting that would undermine Manson's entire framework. If some of your problems aren't your fault, then some solutions might require changing external conditions rather than internal attitudes. That's dangerous thinking for a system that depends on individual compliance. So instead, he expands responsibility to cover everything. Can't afford rent? You're responsible. God's laid off? You're responsible. Born into poverty? Still responsible somehow. This creates learned helplessness disguised as empowerment. You're simultaneously responsible for everything and powerless to change anything except your attitude. He is basically selling repeated failure as a product. The cycle works like this: sell simple solutions to complex problems. When they fail because they're designed to fail, blame the customer. Customer feels worse and returns for more content. Repeat. The genius is in the blame mechanism. Traditional self-help says, think positive, and when that doesn't work, you might question the method. Manson says, think realistic, and when that doesn't work, you question yourself. His method includes a built-in defense against criticism. The raw language and rebellious branding make you think he's fighting the system, but he is the system. So, if Manson's approach is structurally flawed, what does work? The honest answer: nothing will work if you keep thinking inside the same framework. You can't fix systemic control with better self control. You can't outsuffer a machine that's designed to feed on your suffering. The only real step is to see the architecture for what it is. Once you recognize the system, you stop mistaking its demands for your own failures. And until that shift happens, every technique or mindset is just more fuel to the same trap. Mark Manson isn't all wrong. He's got one area of undeniable expertise: business. He mastered the art of monetizing your self doubt. He positioned himself as the anti self help guru who would finally tell you the truth. But his truth is just traditional victim blaming with better marketing. The real function of his philosophy isn't to help you solve problems, it's to prevent you from analyzing them accurately. Instead of looking at why your life is difficult, he wants you to accept that difficulty is just the nature of existence. Your problems have specific causes that can be understood and often addressed. You don't need a philosophy of suffering. You need accurate analysis and strategic thinking. That's the actual subtle art. Not giving a fuck about philosophies that prevent you from thinking clearly about your own situation.